All right, guys. So I am here with Curtis Stone, the man, the myth, the legend. And Curtis, do you want to just give us a little bit of background of your story and where you are right now?
Sure. So probably a lot of people watching this know who I am. The Urban Farmer, or that's the book I wrote. Started on a quarter acre urban farm, scaled it back, did that for 10 years in a couple different incarnations and had a lot of success with it, which led to many of the things that I do now. So I'm not actually farming anymore. Doesn't mean I won't be farming again, but this year I decided to not farm. And I've put most of my efforts into creating content about other farmers. And a lot of that will go into my newer book that I'm working on. But I've built a membership website called FromTheField.farm. And that's kind of become my day job, really. That's mostly what I do is I spend time visiting other growers around the world and sharing their stories and sharing the awesome things they're doing. And it's mostly for the purpose of education, is to help growers either get inspired to start, give them some tips and tricks, and also just dive deep with experts and see what they're doing, and people can learn from that. I also own a tools company with Diego Footer, Paperpot Co., and we're launching some new tools this year. Pretty excited about that. And that's kind of where I'm at these days.
Cool. Now, you were telling me a couple weeks ago that you just this summer you did a 20-state tour, and you visited a bunch of farms, and that's why I wanted you to come on today and talk to us about kind of like some of the really cool farms you visited. Just share a little bit about those.
Yeah.
So take it away. Tell us what was
Yeah.
the highlights.
Okay, well, I'm just going to share my screen here because I put some screenshots together of some of these growers, and so I picked 5 growers, and these were ones that were just kind of I thought might be interesting to share with this audience because they might get a good amount out of it. But there's a lot. Like, I've visited a ton of farms right now. Actually, maybe let me just share one thing for a second here. Like, I visited some really cool people, some people that were sort of big inspirations for me as well. Like, I visited Michael Abelman. Some people might be familiar. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
I went to his farm, Foxglove Farm. That was amazing. That's not going to be on the list I'm going to show. I'm kind of showing some younger growers that I think are really leading the way. But Michael Abelman is really cool. That video is not out yet. One that I did that was really cool, which was super fun, was visiting Carl Hammer of Vermont Compost.
Yes.
That dude is so cool. Man, I
Is.
had so much fun filming him. Like, we had to, if you have this one here, Vermont Compost, we had to chase him around. Like, he was just so high energy, this dude. And I had my second cameraman there, Morgan from
Yep.
Rose Creek Village. Yeah,
Yep.
so I've been using Morgan as a second camera. Actually, as a first camera, I'm second camera to do these interviews. So I've flown him around a little bit now, and that was really fun visiting Vermont Compost. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, but yeah, I'll just kind of share these main ones here. Let me just share the screen again, and what we can pull some interesting lessons from some of these farms. So just to start, these are not really in any order of importance, but these guys, Vitruvian Farms. Can you see that screen okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Sean Tommy and Sean, these two dudes are just totally crushing it, and they're doing a lot. That what they're doing, I think more market gardeners should do is to scale up, but scale up in a way where you're not necessarily commodifying, but scaling up one or two aspects of your operation and then keeping the rest for what we traditionally know in market gardening, like your direct consumer markets, your CSA, your some of your restaurant sales, stuff like that. What they're doing, if you look at their farm here, I think it's about 10 acres. So it's like 95% of their production is large scale loose leaf greens. They're using a New Holland kind of smaller tractor, but they've got an Ortomac harvester. And so these guys are cranking greens. But then you can see this little plot in between the two high tunnels over there. That's like their CSA garden.
Okay.
So I think it's like 60 or 50 or 60 members or something like that. But then they've got the sort of the commodity end, which is growing large scale for retail and restaurants and stuff like that. But I think it's a cool model because it's like scaling up some of the products that you know and that there's market for, and then they kept this other stuff which is maybe a bit more of a passion project, also some diversification. CSA is really built in farm insurance in many ways too.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked what these guys were doing, and their post harvest was really cool. They had this triple wash thing on a conveyor, and this wheel pushes the greens underneath the water, and then all the other stuff floats to the top, and this thing kind of sucks off what's on the top. I thought that was really cool.
And was that custom made, or is that right out of China?
Yeah, they made it. It's all
Yeah.
pretty custom as far as I could tell.
Yeah. And I think what they've done here, though, is they've taken what could be a commodity product, they're competing, but they've built a very unique mix, which is probably why they can get a better price for it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and yeah, they're producing well over 1,000 pounds a week. I think it might have been up to 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something I want to see. I get excited to see farmers make good money at this. Like, it's one thing, on my farm, my numbers were impressive based on the size, but it wasn't that impressive as far as, net take home. Cause like, even my best years of market gardening on our third of an acre at the time, my best years were on a third of an acre. We did over $100,000 in revenue a year, but I only took home at best 70,000 out of that, which is, okay. But like, I want to see farmers make like way more money. I think like something like this could lead to these guys taking home, over $100,000 salaries. I'd like to see that more consistently, because it's one thing to say, yeah, the farm makes six figures, but when you separate the revenue from what's left over, it's like, it's not necessarily.
They're working a lot for, they're working so much harder than people that are just putting in a 40-hour week.
That's right. And there's a lot of skin in the game too. And so I think a model like this could lead to that. And then the next one here, this is a really impressive operation in Coaldale, Alberta, called Mann's Organics, and large scale farm. Andrew Mann's was a young guy too, younger than me, 6 kids too.
Wow.
Dude is just a beast in the greenhouse. Like, I'd never seen greenhouse production like this before. He'd really gone deep into the regenerative stuff, interplanting, full biological pest control, castor beans and all this stuff interplanted with his production. And, you look in the rows and you see like grasses and all this other kind of stuff. And at first, it looks like kind of like hippy dippy kind of permaculture, what you'd think, sort of this whole idea, like, and don't get me wrong, I love permaculture, but a lot of people in that space will get really carried away with this whole idea of interplanting and interdependencies with plants. And often that's just not done in the right way, but Andrew has done it very well. And he really looks at the science and the hard numbers. And he was explaining to me in this, I did two 1-hour videos with him. And just in the greenhouse alone, there was an entire episode. But it was just like going through, what is what, why does this work? Why does this plant work with this? And so on and so forth. He really had a firm understanding of that. And it was very impressive because the crops looked super healthy. The harvest was super abundant. And like, this was in April when I was there. So you look at his field, there's not a lot going on in his field. But this is a big farm, like big center pivot irrigation on there. Most of their field is just like direct seeded onions and storage crops. Like probably 80% of the revenue of the farm comes off that 1 acre gutter connected greenhouse down there.
And that was a rail system in there, a floor rail.
Yeah, system? That's right. That's a rail system. You can see part of the rails there.
Nice.
Scissor lift. They're growing. Their tomatoes are growing like 40 feet long because they do their tomatoes and their peppers a full year, January to January. So just huge production and a lot of. It's all like distributor style. So they're just selling to distributors that are selling to grocery stores. So it's large scale production. They're supplying all over the province of Alberta, which is huge province, and these guys are Southern Alberta. Their product was going as far as Edmonton, which is,
Wow.
like quite a bit further north. So huge reach, big production, really cool to see regenerative type farming done on a large scale and actually getting, prices that are profitable for them, but are also, realistic for a grocery
Mhm.
store to
Yeah.
buy,
A couple questions. Do you remember how tall that greenhouse was?
Oh, at the top point of one of the peaks in there, it was really tall. Like it must have been
Yeah, it looks at least like
30 30.
yeah, it looks like at least a 20 or 22 because I know I've got a grower in Vermont on the edge that does large scale just tomatoes. All they do is tomatoes in there. Longwind Farm is the name of the farm, but it was really cool because he was saying that every year when they build a new greenhouse, they just keep going taller and taller and taller because the more volume you get in the greenhouse, the
Oh yeah.
better uniformity of the weather in there. Because you're
Oh,
basically
for
creating
sure.
your own weather system in there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He talked about that a lot in the video too. It's tall. I think it's taller than 22 feet, to be
Oh,
honest. Like at least at the peak.
yeah,
The peak's probably
yeah.
30. It,
Wow.
it was it was a huge area,
Now,
massive area.
were they doing lights in there during the wintertime?
He was experimenting with stuff like that.
Yeah.
He actually had some new Dutch technology that he was playing around with. Actually, we didn't put that in the video because he had some NDA stuff that
Hmm.
he was experimenting with that he didn't want to show. But yeah, they were the main production. No, they
Okay.
they did
Very
they did
interesting.
enough, just natural light. But it's heated.
Yeah.
Um,
Did
it was funny with these guys too, because like with this kind of farming, especially at this time where we are historically, it's still a very new space. Like to do all this regenerative stuff, like anybody else in the normal marketplace that was doing these kinds of greenhouse crops, even in a place like Alberta, any kind of cold climate, they'd be doing this hydroponically.
hmm
And it would just be massive synthetic fertilizers, and you'd have a better profit margin on there for sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because like Andrew and I were just kind of talking about the state of the risk that this kind of farming is in right now, and that it's experimental. There's not a ton of resources out there. It's just a new frontier, and it was ironic because he was getting slaughtered by the carbon tax. So here's this silly environmentalist policy set up in Canada to help sustainability, but is making farmers like him go broke. Like he lost, he was in the red last year
Oh gosh.
because of the carbon tax. Meanwhile, there's all these conventional farmers. I did an interview with Dakota Cohen, who's a farmer I'm going to mention up here too.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about how all these farmers around him in northern Alberta are getting subsidized by the carbon tax to plant certain crops, but it's all just like
Yeah.
huge bullshit monoculture. And so it's funny. Well, it's not funny. It's horrible. But
Yeah.
it's the insanity of the policy when you
It's
really get
ironic.
into this. It's ironic. It's very ironic, and
Mhm.
it's something like I'm actually going to be starting a new podcast called Liberty on the Land,
Oh,
and
cool.
I'm interviewing farmers about I'm basically compiling testimonies of farmers who have been screwed over by the system, and the whole message I'm trying to show is that all these people, particularly environmentalists, think they're doing good by demanding the government save us from the climate changing, but all these massive policies that are going to go in are just going to disincentivize agriculture and push people off the land. And
Mhm.
so I'm hoping to share more of those stories because I think it's a serious problem, and I think farmers need to start actually taking action with it,
Mhm.
because we're going to lose. We get farmers get controlled by people in cities. All the votes are in cities, and so we get told what to do by people who live in the city who don't understand anything about farming, but set all these policies that govern the way farmers operate. And I think it's a tragedy.
Mhm. It absolutely is. Yeah.
So anyways, that's Man's Organics. This is another farm that I had a hell of a time, just such a fun time with in Durango, Colorado. Clutch Hemp Co. This is
Okay.
Patrick Kane, and the space of hemp. So I'm talking hemp for CBD or fiber. I'm not talking growing for THC. So not growing your typical marijuana plant, growing cannabis plants for CBD and fiber. And you can do three things at once. Actually, I thought it was very interesting talking to Pat. Pat's actually a previous student of mine, and he's by trade is a medical doctor, an ER doctor, and his wife is she's some kind of specialist surgeon. But they're super passionate about hemp, and these guys are making ridiculous money growing hemp. And you'd think that it wouldn't be that way, because hemp is like 100 times cheaper per pound to sell than cannabis or the marijuana, like bud. So, but these guys were killing it, and they were had a really, really cool regenerative business model. And when I use the word regenerative, I mean regenerative in many different ways. The thing that they're doing the most is that I like the most is they have this profit model where they partner with farmers. So they go to farmers that are growing like crappy commodity crops in the area, and they say, okay, instead of growing what is it up there, I think it's not corn, I think it's they grow a lot of wheat and stuff like that. It's high elevation. It's cold, wheat. Right? It's really, really short season. And so they go to growers and they say, hey, instead of growing this like crappy commodity crop where you're making $1,000 an acre, why don't you grow hemp for us? And the way they do the deal is all the farmer has to do is manage the crop. These guys, they own combine, they own all the machines to plant, prep, and harvest the crop. All the farmer has to do is grow it to the end. And and these guys consult the farmers through it. So they've basically trained an army of growers that are growing for them, and they're making good money. So these farmers are on average making about $1,000 per acre on their land. Now they're making $20,000 an acre, and they get a guaranteed sale. So these guys had a really cool business model because they started as a hemp futures company. And so they started this sort of pyramid structure where they started at the very top. And so instead of starting a farm or a growing business, they started a financial futures company where they buy futures. So they take investment money and then they go buy commodity futures and then buy low, sell high strategy, right? And then they kept moving down the tier. So now they're at a point where they're totally vertically integrated. At the very bottom, they're growing the product. Up the chain, they're harvesting and processing the product. And then they are distributing that product to pharmaceutical companies. And then at the top, they're a futures company. And so this is a brilliant business model, and everybody's making money. Their profit margin was 85%.
Wow.
So they're making so much money. It's insane. I did 2 weeks of interviews with Pat, and the first week we just kind of toured the operation. It was early in the season, so like we really only got to see the mothers. So they make mother plants by cloning, and then those get propagated out, and then they get planted in the field with big water wheel tractors.
Is this the mothers in the background of this picture?
Those are some of the mothers.
Okay.
They had this crazy greenhouse, this crazy Pausa Solar greenhouse here that they were leasing. That was like the primary location of their mothers, but this here was his home site where they still had them. They had them in different places. It's kind of a decentralized business. They have things all over, and they totally bootstrapped it because when they started, they just leased and rented everything. So they got in the game really quick. And then they've been recapitalizing by buying the infrastructure. It's like super, super neat, forward-thinking business model. And now they're like, they're probably all cropped out now. Like at this time of year, October, they're probably right into their processing and all that. But these guys it's just unbelievable. And they're experimenting too with like intercropping pasture stuff between their hemp plants. They plant them like 6-foot wide rows, 38 inches every plant. And the plants get massive. And the neat thing about this kind of growing opposed to growing for flower for like a THC product is that you're not as picky about you don't have to manicure the plants at all. You just grow it and it expresses itself the way it normally would. And then they come in with a corn combine and they crop out the whole thing. And it doesn't matter if it's wet or anything, it crops it out. And I mean, it's hard on machinery. There's one thing I've learned about
because they're
growing hemp is,
massive stalks.
they are like the plants in my backyard right now. The stalks are this thick.
Wow.
They're like trees, and it's hard on machinery. But the cool thing about it is they can get 3 products. I mentioned this earlier. I'm just kind of circling back to it. They get 3 products. They out of one crop. They get a woody fiber that's used in like industrial products, like people are making hempcrete and stuff like that now, ropes and things like that. Then they get a more of a finer fiber that can be used in clothing.
Okay.
And then on the top of the plant is basically in thirds. The bottom third is woody. The middle third is a finer fiber from the branches, and then the top is your main cola buds that go into the flower that makes CBD oil. And so like you can make a really good profit just on the CBD itself. But adding the fiber in is, well, then they're reducing the waste of the plant, and then they're using the whole thing, and that's going to, you know, industrial clothing and whatever products. They're these guys are just strictly business to business, so they're just selling to pharmaceuticals mostly as far as the CBD. And it was neat because Pat, as a doctor, he just knew so much about the pharmaceutical industry, and he seemed to I've had a lot of success getting into that marketplace because investors really believed in him. I mean, it's something I've learned a lot. I have a lot of friends in the Okanagan here where I live that are in technology and run technology companies. We're a bit of a tech sector here. And so much of that game is just personality. Like all like pumping up these companies. It's totally just, I don't want to say it's a bullshit game, but it's just like putting on a face, impressing people, and then getting investment money. These guys just have had so many millions in investment come at them. Like he can't take any more money. But they're super profitable too. So it's just an incredible success story.
That's crazy.
And they're a farm that I'm going to be following for a long time. Pat's a pretty good friend, and I love it down there in Durango, Colorado. I don't know if you've been there, but it's just beautiful area.
No, it's absolutely gorgeous down there. Okay, a couple questions here. So are they then the combine in it, and then do they wet bale it so it's wrapped like the big marshmallow bales?
I don't know exactly how they do that actually. I'm gonna have to go back at a time with the harvesting to see.
Because we have a pretty large hemp group, actually a Facebook hemp group, Curtis, probably the second largest one in the US right now. And I've seen some video footage. It may have been from these guys, sent it our way. And it's exactly as you're describing, these massive combines going through the field, chopping the plants up, and then out the back end, they spit these, you know, the 4x4 or 6x6 plastic wrap bales.
That's probably what it is.
I'll see if I can get some footage from them to add into this talk to make it, you know, kind of see that process. That'd be pretty cool.
Totally.
So one thing I want to pull out here, Curtis, is this guy is thinking about the whole farming industry in a completely different way than 99.9% of the people that get into farming right now.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's so key.
Oh, totally. Especially if you want to get rich at this. Like, you know, there's nothing wrong with just making a living that you're satisfied with in any kind of business, whatever you want to do. I'm an ambitious entrepreneur. I have no problem with making lots of money and all that. And I encourage people to do so, because I think if you want to achieve freedom, you know, money can give you more freedom. And so that's kind of where I'm at. But Pat, similar mindset, like they're just going at it huge. And it's like, why the hell not? You know, just go for it. Especially once you get to a place where you can delegate and outsource things to some degree, it's possible to be very productive. It's one thing I've learned, you know, like I said, I have a lot of friends in tech who do a lot of things and are super effective. It's like that Pareto principle, you know, it's like, you have no idea how productive some people can be. And Patrick was like, this guy was doing so many things. I'm just like, holy shit, how are you doing all, well, for one, he didn't have kids yet. So, and him and his wife, they do want to have kids. And I think they're kind of just making haste while the sun is shining.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how just effective some people are. And this guy was one of those. And it was neat to see that in farming, because farmers have a typically, and there's many great growers that aren't this way, but I would say farmers typically struggle with this sort of like chicken with their head cut off type thing. You're just like constantly running around fixing that. It's like you might start the day with a plan, but you got derailed in the morning, and then the rest of your day is like completely off track. Is the one thing I've learned of people who are super effective, is like they just have the ability to focus and know when to pull away from something when the time is right. And you know, this guy was just so effective in everything he was doing. He had a lot of people working for him too. Really picked a solid core team that were, you know, that's mostly who he talks to, and then those people go and delegate out. Because there was a lot of people here. Like when just the day that I was with Pat touring the farm, I must have seen like 30 employees, and that there's no way that was all of them, because we were on different sites. We were kind of bouncing around, and it's just amazing how much he was managing. Like I've never seen that on a farm, like on a market garden. I've never seen that before.
Now, do you feel that I know there's been a lot of talk about hemp this year. Do you feel like the hemp is getting saturated?
It might be, yeah, it might be. At the same time, I mean, on this tour, like a lot of these farms you're going to see in here, you have Vitruvian, Mans, and these guys. That was all from one tour. I did this big Middle Western tour. I drove, started from home in BC, went through Alberta, straight through Montana, went through Utah, Moab, all that, up through Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota. I went through all these states. And if we say, is it saturated? Well, I don't know, because when I drove to the Midwest, all I saw was corn. That's it. Like Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Northern Colorado, Nebraska, it's all corn. Like if you drive through those states, all you see is corn. So is it saturated? When you look at that in the grand scheme of things, maybe not. But that, because that maybe it's potentially that it's saturated now, in that the marketplace hasn't fully adjusted, because there's still so much BS with regulations going on that. I think this could save a lot of farmers, because instead of growing 1,000 acres of GMO corn, grow 1,000 acres of hemp. Not only is it more profitable, but it's a low feeder. And because it's such a new space, there's so many ways that we can innovate. Like I really think there's going to be a opportunity for hemp growers to also do custom grazing on their land post crop. So I think Pat was experimenting a bit with this too, where you go and you plant your transplants in the ground, you let those get a couple feet high, and then you sow an understory of a pasture grass. And then you let that crop grow. You go into your combine, you harvest the hemp crop, and then you bring in animals on custom grazing to graze it and fertilize and build your soil, and then do it again the next year. I think you're going to see things like that happening more and more.
And because food safety doesn't matter with this crop, it doesn't matter the time frame. You can bring the animals in anytime there's not active plants growing in the field that they would eat.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you'd have to do it after the main crop is out, because the animals would just destroy it.
Because they love it.
They would, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, this is one thing my friend that I'm going to show you next, Dakota Cohen, has experimented a bit with using hemp fiber and basically just ground up hemp plants, cannabis plants, as silage, as feed for animals. So there's other opportunities in there. But you know, I'm learning about all this stuff. Like I'm not an expert in these things. I can definitely say I'm an expert in market gardening, But you know, this has been just so fun for me this year because honestly, I've learned more about farming this year than I have in the last 5 years.
Hmm.
Just because I've been on so many different types of farms, and I'm starting to pursue more animal-based operations. I'm going to be visiting some seaweed culture farms in the next year, getting more into the aquaculture stuff, looking at just expanding out into the enterprises and seeing what's out there and who's doing interesting work.
Hmm. You're gonna probably want to visit William Padilla Brown in Pennsylvania with his mushrooms.
Okay.
He's doing cordyceps mushrooms, which are a very medicinal mushroom. And he basically, when he started, people told him they could not be domesticated, and he's living proof that they are. He's got a second book out that just launched not too long ago.
Okay, that's interesting. I might circle back about that. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, the thing I've discovered with all this is there's so much cool stuff going on out there. It's kind of overwhelming. Next year, I'm going to be having some other people join my team, like other content creators,
Hmm.
to build content for the platform, and other people that will specialize in certain types of agriculture. Also, this means I don't have to travel as much. Like
Hmm.
I have another baby coming in a couple weeks, and it's, you know,
Yeah.
I'm trying to tone it back. I mean, we've done a lot of. I bring my family on most of these trips, and so we've been driving to do these trips, and that's been a lot of fun. But if we can do it that way, I'll do that. I'll, you know, continue to do probably most of the content that way. But I'm looking at having other people be involved. I got a bunch of stuff coming with Diego Fooder
Very
about
cool.
you know, pastured poultry and stuff like that, other types of animal-based operations.
Very cool.
Yeah. So should I just keep going through? I
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
a couple more
Yep.
guys. Okay.
Keep going.
So this farm, this is Cohen Farm in Farintosh, Alberta. This is Dakota Cohen, young man, but 28 years old, incredibly gifted. He has this guy. I think I'm going to predict that in 10 years, this guy will be like the next Joel Salatin.
Okay.
He's very well spoken, articulate. He's smart as a whip,
Hmm.
and he's a really good farmer. And he's had training with some of the best people in the industry. And he's got a large scale farm. He's got sort of a collection of circumstances that are hard to find. One being he owns his land outright with no debt.
Wow.
And so it's a quarter section, which I believe is 150 acres. And so it's a proper large scale regenerative farm. He's got the longest swale in Canada. It's a 1 kilometer long swale. You can
Wow.
actually see it here along the top. And this is actually a very brittle climate in this part of Alberta, but they're harvesting 40 years of rain every year into their land by using he's got all kinds of catch water dams. His whole water management system is just brilliant. And it's so functional in the way that it works. Like he's got swales that are harvesting water as sort of a plume into the landscape.
Hmm.
And then he's collecting that in a variety of different dams. But he's got this really cool ram pump system where he has a 1-inch line that can pump water up and also direct water in and around the farm on one line. And so he can use that to feed his animals wherever they are, because he does a lot of the sort of Salatin style grazing with cattle, and he's got pigs, and he's also got a really neat system for in winter, the way he manages his animals. He's got this sort of like he'll explain it way better than I could in the video, but it's sort of this spoke system where all these animals come into the center point. They're all kind of separated, but he can, when he does his morning chores, he can do all these things in one area, and it really minimizes how much he moves around the farm, especially in the winter. And he's got this really smart system with, and I'm new to animal agriculture. Like this is, I'm not an expert in this whatsoever. I've been learning so much, but it's all fairly new to me. He's got this really cool thing where he's diverted the land in this spoke system, which is kind of near the center hub of where his farm is, where his homestead is, and all that. All the animals, the pigs, the cows that come to feed there, and the chickens, they all shit in this area. And as it rains, all that water washes into this little pond that he's built, and he's found a way of proliferating duckweed, and all the
Ah,
nitrogen, excess nitrogen that comes off that manure goes into this pond and creates this duckweed that explodes, and he feeds the duckweed to the animals, and the pigs and the chickens love it, and he ferments it. He like takes it and then he ferments it, and it's such a neat system. He's really closing the loop. It's like, it's very broad stuff like this. His farm, I wouldn't say is like an example of, turnkey, high profit, all that. It's something different. It's like it's looking at solutions
yeah.
in regenerative agriculture, and like, how do you close the loop? How do you create really nutrient dense food?
Yeah.
This guy has customers, like, he has it's interesting. His customer base is a bunch of millionaires actually that come to his farm because they want the best food. He has one customer who's this super rich guy who has this crazy autoimmune disease, and he only eats food from Takota's farm because it's the only thing his body can take. And
Wow.
Takota's done all kinds of like, hey, try this, try that, and they've been kind of working through. It's neat. He's kind of a healer, and
Hmm.
he's really tuned into people's needs and trying to find solutions for that on his farm.
And that, to that point, that's why farmers need to make enough money. So, because
Yeah,
if they can make enough money, then they can focus on being the healers that we need to be. Because how much, I mean, so people would so much rather spend the money on a farmer who's on the green earth than the pharmaceutical companies.
absolutely. And there's a growing market for that. And I think if you can be in a position where you can go at the top price tier, like
Hmm.
if you can sell to millionaires, why the hell not?
Hmm.
Like, sure, it's great to have food for everybody, but at the same time, if there's people that are willing to pay you more for a little bit extra service, why wouldn't you take that? And Takota has no bones about that whatsoever. He's fully taken advantage of that, and he's making a living doing it. But he's got a cool circumstance because his parents were organic farmers for many years, and they
Hmm.
paid the land off. And he has 5 or 6 other siblings, and none of them wanted to farm, and so they all agreed, well, if Takota's the only one that wants to do it, he can have the land. And so he's
Wow.
basically inherited the land to the family. His mom and dad still live on the land, but
Hmm.
he does all this stuff himself.
So, would you say it's how much are his prices increased from, let's say, normal grass-fed beef prices?
I think they're 4 times higher. Oh, the normal grass
Yeah.
fed. I think. Oh, I think is 4 times higher than conventional.
Okay.
But
So,
I'm not exactly sure actually. Yeah,
yeah. So probably double what you'd normally pay for a grass-fed steak. Um,
possibly. Yeah,
yeah.
I know that he has the most expensive beef in Alberta.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
I know that for sure. Um, but yeah, just an incredible farm, and I love going there because I just learned so much, and he's so connected to the land, and he just understands. He
Mhm.
understands these things from a really deep systems level thinking. He's kind of a protege of Rob Avis in many ways from
Yep.
Verge Permaculture. Rob's an
Mhm.
engineer, really close personal friend of mine.
Mhm.
And Rob actually just bought some land not too far from Takota, so he's going to be up there himself soon. But him and Takota have worked a lot on consulting projects and whatnot, and Takota's learned a lot from Rob. But Takota has the place to do all this stuff and
Mhm.
try all this stuff, and it's really cool to see.
Mhm. Mhm. Very cool.
Yeah, so that's Cohen Farm. And then my last one here, these two guys, Vincent Marceau and Vincent Lafleur.
Mhm.
These two guys are students of, well, Vincent Lafleur on the right was a student of Jean-Martin Fortier's.
Yeah.
Vincent Marceau on the left, he worked at some other farms in Quebec. And these dudes, like, perfect example of if you have the right know-how and the right gear up front, and I guess the confidence to execute, you can crush it right out of the gate. And so this is a market garden, very similar to my
Mhm.
wheelhouse.
Mhm.
But these dudes just had it dialed from the get-go.
Yeah.
They're making money. Their farm is doing high six figures. I think they're going to be breaking $250,000 next year. like just
Nice.
absolutely crushing it right out of the gate.
Mhm.
Have the lifestyle. They both have kids. They got their families there on the farm. It's two couples with their families living the dream. They're just doing it. And I loved visiting them because like they just knew so much. I did 2 weeks of videos with these guys, and I just had, I think it was the first week I broke a record. Like I produced like 21 pieces of content in 1 week because
Wow.
I got so many awesome things out of these guys. Like they knew, like this is, I found this really impressive, is they knew every idiosyncrasy of all of their crops to a T. Many market growers get into it and they might know a couple right out of the gate, and then they grow a bunch of stuff and they don't really know a lot about it. These guys could talk for an hour on every single crop they grew.
Wow.
And like, that's how I got so much content out of them, because we literally just walked around the field and I got like really focused short videos on every single crop. And then we went into the greenhouse, and like the greenhouse production was just next level. Like they just, they had it so dialed. Definitely like learned a lot from Jean-Martin Fortier, but they just were executing it so well. And they ran a tight ship. Like they only had one employee. It was the two of them.
What?
And then one of their wives works with them on the farm. And then they had one employee. And so they were doing all this, you know, with only one paid employee. Everybody else is, you know, in the couple that live there.
And I'm noticing that they're actually putting up more greenhouses from that picture. So they're really investing in the covered production.
Oh, full on. And I mean, that's one thing too, that, you know, if you're going to get into market gardening, it's all about greenhouses. I realized this more. I realized this a lot more next year. I mean, I've always known that. It's kind of common sense.
Oh, yeah.
But after I visited Brian Bates up at Bear Creek in he's some random small town in northern Michigan, like that dude's production is just unbelievable, next level. And they're doing, you know, they're probably going to be at $500,000 in revenue next year on their 2 acres.
Easily.
Like insane production. And it's just all about the high tunnels.
Oh yeah.
And you know, like these guys here were really going at the hot crops, like the nightshades, the tomatoes, the eggplants, the peppers, and all that. But Brian, you know, he just goes at the greens, and I, like, you know, of course, I'm the biggest advocate for greens. That's how I, you know, my entire farm business was built off that. I still think it's like, man, if you got a market for that, that's gravy. Because the thing is with the tomato crop stuff, when you really get into the lower and lean, a lot of people don't really dive into what actually is the net return on those crops, because there's so much work doing those crops. But with greens, it's just not even close.
Oh yeah.
It's not even close. It's
your margin is massive.
The margin is in greens is ridiculous, especially if you can move hundreds to thousands of pounds a week. But you know, to do that same kind of production with tomatoes, yeah, in some premium markets, you might get $8 a pound for really fine cherry tomatoes in April and May. But the work that you had to go, like I know JM has, I believe it's 2 guys working full time all year in the tomato greenhouses.
Wow. Yeah.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. That
with
makes
all
sense.
the constant fertilization, all the lower and lean, all the pruning, it's a lot of work. And you know, especially when you're doing the real lower and lean, you got to direct the way those plants grow, and you got to keep them off the ground. You really got to be meticulous about how you're managing that. And they're heavy feeders. And you got to bring in so many insects. And this is where the margin really starts to slip on these types of intensive farms. And that was the same up here with Andrew Manns. He spends, check this out, he spends $80,000 a year on bugs.
That's crazy.
$80,000 on bugs.
Yes.
So pollinators, beneficials, you know, all that stuff. 80 grand a year on bugs. Like, holy crap. You know, you want to get into high tunnel greens production. It's like, it's not even, it's nothing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, tomatoes and the nightshades are just those sexy crops because you look at, oh my gosh, I made $1,000 this week at the market on just tomatoes, but
Yeah.
$800 of that went to the propane, the lower and lean, the labor. And here's the thing, what I tell people on tomatoes, if you have a greenhouse malfunction early in the season and lose a crop from a frost, you are instantly out lots and lots of money compared to
Oh
greens.
yeah.
Greens are so much high margin. If you lose
I
a
know.
crop or two, it doesn't matter.
I know. I
And
know.
they're hardy.
They're hardy, and you don't need the inputs. Like you don't need to heat the greenhouses really.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I forget if Brian Brian is heating a little bit at the coldest times of year because
Yeah.
Michigan's cold. It's like Canada.
Yeah. Well, Brian's
It's
doing lights and heating in his micros.
on his micros. He is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and his micro production was insane too. Like
Oh yeah, that's next level.
he was cranking. There's a grower actually I visited. He's not in this list. There's so many growers I could have put in this list. I just kind of quickly chose 5 that I thought were cool.
Mhm.
But there's a farm up in Toronto called Living Earth Farms. Jonah Kroc Malik,
Mhm.
and this guy's crushing it. I mean, it's totally indoor LED type thing, which is not my cup of tea. Like I could not do that as a career. Being
Yeah.
surrounded by LED lights, I think I'd go crazy. But this guy is really scaling and automating his microgreens. Like super smart dude. He's got all these like systems set up. He's built his own software for this operation. Super cool farm. I did a short video of it on YouTube, not actually just recently. And I think I got another one coming out too. But yeah, he was doing it really well. I mean, it's like people think that all this stuff is saturated, and it's just not. And it also depends on where you are. Like when people say, oh, are microgreens saturated? It's like, maybe. Depends where you are. If you wanted to start a microgreens operation around the Los Angeles area, yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But there's probably so many other cities in the United States that don't do this. And the same goes for greens. Like, 'cause, we always hear this whole thing like, well, everybody can't grow greens, right? Well, it's like, well, yeah, you can. Because if they're still coming from California, like if people in Michigan and New York State and all these other colder climate states are still getting greens from California, that means there's a market. And the same goes for microgreens, because a lot of the microgreens in the United States come from large operations that are doing overnight shipping around.
Mhm.
And you can go and compete with that and offer a lower price for a local product, because a lot of the margin gets eaten up in transport, because overnight shipping is expensive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like there's still a market for a lot of this stuff, like despite what people think. It just depends on where you are. It's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
But like, maybe it's worth moving to a place that's a fresh market. Because I mean, like, come on, market gardening is not even like 1%, not even 1% of the total food production that comes out of the United States that feeds the United States.
You're
So
correct.
there's so much space out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. It's unreal, the potential out there that people just aren't seeing because we're so focused on such a very narrow part of the whole industry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
What
yeah,
are the
those are my 5 growers.
Nice. That was a great mix. And yeah, I'm super excited about, visiting all 5 of those at some point and just checking out in person. Have you heard of the Chef's Garden outside of Cleveland?
I have. I think.
Yeah. Because they're that massive microgreen kind of person. I mean, he's kind of this eccentric person, which basically some marketer got a hold of and basically built an entire brand around. And it's crazy the stuff they do, and it's such a micro niche kind of stuff, but they get sky high prices and they ship all across the nation. So
Crazy.
I absolutely recommend farmers get their catalog, look at it, and then go talk to your chefs, because some of that stuff is actually quite easy for you to grow.
Wow. Yeah. No, I'll check that out. Like, yeah, there's, sort of at the end of my 10-year stint farming, we really got into retail. And that's actually where I won't say the best margins were made, but looking at the whole picture, in my revenue is the highest, but I had the best lifestyle. Because as soon as I got out of selling to chefs, everything just became easier. Like, I loved selling to restaurants like that. I was passionate about that, but I did get tired of the BS. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they constantly don't pay your bills. Like, I've been screwed over by chefs so many times. The flakiness, you have to work so hard to get the sale from them. Whereas with retail, it's like set up the account and then just drop the same stuff off every week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I could probably do this for the rest of my life, because I had an employee at the time who was able to manage all that. Like, I was able to I was in Europe doing a speaking tour there. My farm was still running just fine. It was manageable at that point. Whereas when it was just mostly chef based, it was really hard to find the lifestyle, because it's a high maintenance customer, chefs.
Yeah.
That's just the reality from what I've gathered. It doesn't mean that there aren't great chefs out there to sell to. There certainly are. It's just like, if you can get into some kind of retail, isn't necessarily wholesale, but some kind of market like that, you can just scale so much easier, because you're just fulfilling standing orders.
Mm-hmm.
And that just makes things so much easier on the back end when it comes to managing the operation.
Yeah. Now, and here's the key point about that is so many people think they need to get such high prices from these retail stores. But when you actually calculate what you put into all the marketing and all the calling chefs and all of that,
That's the
and
thing.
subtract
Yeah.
that, you can sell for so cheap and still make more money.
Well, that's exactly it. Like, I was, you know, when I was selling to chefs, I was getting between $8 and $10 a pound for my greens, which is great. You know,
Mm-hmm.
$10 a pound would be sort of, that'd be more of a farmer's market price. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say with chefs, if they're buying bulk, it's like anywhere between 8 and 9. You know, arugula, I always sold at $10 a pound to chefs, no matter what the volume. But with the retail, I was able to get my product down to $6 a pound, even low as $5 a pound,
Wow.
and still make really good money. Because, like you said, with the restaurants and the chefs, there's a lot of things that are sort of invisible as far as accounting. Like, you're not really counting all the time you spend on the phone, all the time you spend following up, all the time you spend making fresh sheets and all that. And that's important. Uh, Whereas, like, you know, when you're packing a retail product and say you're selling that product for $3 a unit, and that's retailing for $4.99, so there's quite a bit of markup on, almost 100, like, you know, 80% markup on that. But you didn't do any work for the sale. All you did is put the work in to pack the product. So it's super important to look at, because you have it just requires an honest look. And
Mm-hmm.
like, that was hard for me. It was almost like of a cognitive dissonance, because I got so engrossed in the chef scene, and I really got like wooed by the whole like celebrity culture of it too. The chef, like, they really liked me too, because I'm like a quasi local celebrity. And
Mm-hmm.
so they'd like, you know, and I kind of got into all that, and it kind of puffs your ego up. But at the end of the day, I got so tired of the BS that I dealt with chefs, like the flakiness, the not paying the invoices. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just got so tired, and the egos, you know, like, I just got so tired of it. When I started selling to retail, it was like, I'm dealing with a produce manager who's probably making at best $15 an hour, but oh my God, are they much easier to deal with?
Yes.
It's just like, hey, bring me the same thing every week unless I tell you otherwise. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that's where we got to a point on the farm. This started about 3 years ago, where I took weekends off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, we dropped our farmer's market a while ago, and then we said, you know, let's just go full on at this retail thing. And then it was amazing, because I was just doing Monday to Friday like everybody else, and I was making good money at it. And it was like, the lifestyle was there. Then I could have weekends, our daughter was born shortly after that. And so it's like, now I can have time and
Mm-hmm.
have more of a normal lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, Curtis, what would you say your biggest lessons from your trips last summer were?
Biggest lessons. Oh man. I mean, I'd have to really think about that. It's a really good question. You know, out of all these farms, like, you really got to, I mean, some of this stuff is going to seem obvious. I mean, I'd say that, like, biggest takeaway I got is that there's just still so many opportunities in regenerative and sustainable agriculture. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just ridiculous how many opportunities there are. Biggest barriers are from the regulatory world, as far as I can tell, really. But you know, some of the biggest takeaways is, like, you really have to monitor your costs.
Mm.
And like this, a lot of farmers overlook this, and especially if that's the one disadvantage of this space is like, if you want to get into the regenerative side, so I'll separate sustainable and regenerative because I believe they are different.
Mm-hmm.
But in the regenerative space, it's still it's a wild west, and you don't really know what your fixed costs are. And so I've seen a lot of farms go in the red because they just didn't keep a close eye on that. And they didn't necessarily make back those returns later in the year when their production was pumping, because there's a lot of upfront. I'd say, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that I've seen. You know, I've been learning a lot about the changing marketplace, which has been interesting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's in the hemp space too. Like it's really interesting to see where these products are going. Like companies like Patagonia are just buying up crazy amounts of hemp. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, Michael. I mean, that probably gives you something there, but
Well,
yeah.
I think what I'm hearing you say too is I think so frequently we paint ourselves into boxes about what a farm has to look like. And
Yeah.
what you just showed me in these last things is there's so many different things out there that you can do and it can look like, and it's
Yes.
just sky's the limit.
Absolutely.